good evening, and welcome to The Caring View, the online social care chat show available every single Tuesday live and on catch up. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe, hit that bell, follow us on our social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, you name it, we are there. And don't forget to go and check out our podcast as well. Find us on Spotify. Anything that we are on, it is just at The Caring View. Good evening. Oh, everything we discussed tonight are our views and nobody else's. Probably a little bit important tonight for the intro for today's show. Mark, how are you?
Yes, not too bad, thank you. You?
I'm devastated, Mark.
How comes?
I'm devastated because I didn't get Eurovision tickets.
Oh, I know. Do you know what? I was trying. Alice was trying. I had my parents trying, my brother trying, and yeah, I'm very upset that I didn't get any Eurovision tickets. And everybody in the office just found it absolutely hilarious. They were like, "Why would you want to pay that much money for Eurovision?" And I was like, "It's going to be like once in our lifetime that I want to go." But yeah,
Honestly, I am so annoyed. It's like the Gay Olympics. I love Eurovision. It is just absolutely, and it's down the road. It's literally down the road. I could drive there and back. And anyway, it's grumble, annoyed. I think we need to have some real big online parties this year and celebrate Eurovision in style. I won't boycott it, I promise.
We'll have to download what was the app that became really popular at the beginning of the pandemic? Face Party? FaceTime? No, it wasn't Face Party, wasn't it?
Oh my God, do you remember Face Party from years ago?
Yeah. From years ago, I only remember the one from lockdown that then got removed because apparently it like hacked your phone or something.
Oh no, Face Party from years ago. It used to be like this thing, and you used to connect and go on like mad raves and stuff like that. You know, back in another life and another time. Oh dear. So anyway, what have we got to talk about so far? Care Sector's Got Talent. Clock is ticking. You have 12 days to get your audition tapes into Care Sector's Got Talent. We still do not have anyone doing burlesque. If anyone can do burlesque and works and lives in care, please do it. I want it on the talent show. Mark, what do you want to see on talent show this year?
I know I've said this before, and I'm trying to think of something new to say, but I do really want to see a dog doing tricks. Do you remember like Pugsy from Britain's Got Talent? Just something like that is what I really want to see.
It would be good. What about something different though? Like, what about a parrot? No, parrots are quite common, aren't they? What about a bunny rabbit? If you could do a bunny rabbit riding a unicycle, that would be brilliant. Don't think they've got the dexterity for that though, have they? But it's really simple to do. Championing Social Care are heading this. It's absolutely fantastic. It's a real ball. The live show is on the 20th of April. Mark and I will be there doing the backstage interviews as we were last year. Promise you we will not put you through any of our performances. We think Tuesday nights are enough. But I think it's going to be very, very good. So anybody, let's start celebrating who we have in care and our teams and our people. So we have Care Sector's Got Talent. Mark, bombshell of the week. Matt Hancock's text.
Oh, yeah. Do you know, I do worry though that they are hiding something behind the scenes, that we're all getting absorbed into what the texts are, and we're going to be missing something that we really should know about. It just doesn't surprise me from the government. But
are you thinking scapegoat?
Yeah. What do you think of the text? I'm not surprised. I think it just confirms what we probably all assumed and guessed what was happening. But what did you think?
Do you know what? I'm divided because I still want him in prison, and I can't believe he's not in prison, if I'm completely honest. Let's shove him on an island and then he earns loads of money and he brings out a book. Fool. An absolute fool giving 100,000 messages to somebody to write a book from, knowing full well they're just going to go, oh my God, this shit is good. Gonna have to tell everybody about this. So what an absolute idiot for doing that in the starters. For me, I'm concerned because I really do feel like this is just going to fuel a massive distrust in government, no matter who's in power. And I think we're always going to feel like we've had the piss taken out of us, basically. So we had pandemic, we're all locked in, we can't go anywhere, apart from if you work in social care, but no one cared about that anyway. And you're doing that, and then they're literally laughing at us at parties, and now we're reading these messages and he's going, oh God, no one's hit my target today, I've still got 20,000 tests to do. How do we scare them into coming and get the test done? And you sit there and going, actually, were you orchestrating most of this to either reach targets to get a bonus or just to sort of drum up the fear? And if you were drumming up the fear, people were living terrified, absolutely terrified lives. And you're there joking about it over WhatsApp with people. And it's like, you guys run the country. So I'm concerned that anti-lockdown agendas, and again, whichever side of the fence you sit on, I really don't care what your political views are. I just really worry that it's going to do some irreparable damage that even a general election, kicking the Tories out and getting Labour in, will not fix. I mean, we've got this one here. This one was about his PPE. But here, Matt Hancock, I need to call a favour in tomorrow. I currently have 22,000 spare slots at my drive-thrus, hence I've extended eligibility today. Demand just isn't there. This is obviously good news about the spread of the virus, but hard for my target. Boo bloody who. So I really could do with a testing splash. Can we make this happen? Obviously, everyone's favourite person, George Osborne. Yes, of course. All you need to do tomorrow is give me some exclusive words to the Standard and tell the team to splash it out. You're almost there. Send the words by 8 a.m. tomorrow. You'll like the editorial. Well done. Matt Hancock, in caps locks, I want to hit my target, exclamation point. Well, Matt Hancock, I wanted Eurovision tickets and I haven't bloody got them. You can't get what you want. And just by scaring and coercing people isn't the way. So it's really riled me up, Mark. Really riled me up. I mean, there was stuff around the care homes, and Chris Whitty was basically saying, look, you should be testing everyone going into care homes. Absolutely everybody, from hospital, from community. And Matt's going, I think it's going to muddy the waters. Should we just do care homes? Now he's come out today, or someone who's close to Matt has come out today and said, oh, actually, these texts have now been doctored and is telling a false story. We're just never going to get the truth. And all of this is just going to muddy the waters, to use Matt's phrase. And we probably will never get a full inquiry that uncovers the truth of it. He's never going to be an MP again. We get that. You know, there's no hard loss there, but we've got worse people in power at the moment. So, I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so, in a roundabout way. I think you are right, though. I think it has tarnished the trust and the reliability that we have in the government. I think for me, the biggest shock that they were doing it over WhatsApp out of all the kind of systems that are out there to communicate. I'm surprised it wasn't Teams or something, that a bit more, credibility. But
well, the thing is, don't get me wrong, I know WhatsApp's end-to-end encrypted, but they have an absolute hissy fit if someone uses their personal email address. And, you'd think with it being WhatsApp, and this is, I don't want to give them any ideas, but you can set disappearing messages. You can clean your messages. Why would you keep stuff that's obviously so incriminating? Oh, I don't know. Absolute buffoon. A lot of them. Absolute lot of them.
Well, on to some nicer news. So there was a guide released today, which was a short guide introducing new technology into social care. So I'm going to share the link into the chat, which I had a read through today. It's only 15 pages, which sounds like a lot, but actually most of the pages are kind of only half a page full of text, lots of kind of images in it. But actually, I found it really supportive if you were looking for new technology within your service. It talks about kind of AI and bits and pieces, which is obviously on the horizon. So I've just popped that into the chat, but definitely well worth a read. It was done by John Glassby, and just scrolling to the top, and the NIHR, the National Institute for Health and Care Records and Digital Social Care. But yeah, definitely well worth a read.
Just on that as well, Mark, something that completely slipped under my radar was around the Data Matters roadmap that the government released. And I know a lot of people have some sort of concerns around the capacity tracker. They want a single central place to send their data in, so actually it takes less time. Apparently the government are listening. Whether this is a last-ditch attempt to secure a decent poll at the election next time, I've no idea. I'll pop the link to that in the chat as well. It is quite interesting to read through if you like digital and social care. So there we are. Anyway, tonight, what are we on?
We are on safeguarding tonight. So we're joined by the lovely Claire Webster, who is coming on to talk about safeguarding and LPS and whether or not it is ever going to happen. So it's been spoken about for a long time. Good evening, Claire.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me this evening.
No, thank you very
LPS
much
to
for
me at the
joining
moment
us.
is very much like Santa Claus. You know, and if there are kids watching this, Santa Claus is real and he does come. Don't worry about that. The LPS is very much real. Whether it actually comes or not is another question. So I'm going to be interested to hear from you tonight on this, Claire.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those things. I think everybody's obviously waiting for the public announcement and really the response to the consultation that I know myself and a number of organisations participated in. I don't know if there's anybody on the call who's on the video tonight who's actually participated in that as well, but hopefully we will get something, they said the winter, soon. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. So for anybody that doesn't know you, Claire, did you want to just introduce yourself and just give a bit of background information about who you are?
So I'm currently a practice development consultant for an organisation called the Social Care Institute for Excellence, or SKY, or some people call it CSky. But effectively, it's a national organisation that effectively is health and social care sector facing and generally works with a number of organisations, and that does include the Department of Health and Social Care on a number of different projects to help produce guidance and support to the sector in a variety of areas, whether that be the Mental Capacity Act, which is an area I sort of lead on, safeguarding, that type of thing. Prior to this, because I've only been with Sky about 6 months, I was in North Yorkshire. I am a qualified social worker, which is where my Twitter handle comes from. I've got about 14 years experience in adult social care, but before I joined Sky, I was actually a strategic lead for the implementation of the Mental Capacity Act and deprivation of liberty safeguards and doing liberty protection safeguards planning just before I moved on. And that's kind of the expertise that I've sort of brought into Sky, really. But I have got particular interest, not just in the area of liberty protection safeguards in itself, but it's actually about restrictive practices and looking at the interaction between things like Mental Health Act reform as well as liberty protection safeguards, and just generally having a look at the arena of supporting, for example, autistic people and people with learning disabilities in restrictive settings and what that can mean under legal frameworks. So I don't just have an interest in the legal frameworks, it's very much about obviously how it impacts people as well.
No, thank you very much. So I think we'll take it right back to basics. So are you able to explain to everybody what is safeguarding when it comes to adults and children?
So effectively, safeguarding is a consideration as to whether there is an adult at risk of some type of abuse. Unlike things under the Care Act and needs assessments, this isn't a criteria-led situation in terms of people who have needs will have an assessment process under the Care Act. With the Care Act, it sets out as obviously a statutory duty to undertake safeguarding investigations, particularly for local authorities where people might be at risk of various areas, whether that be physical abuse, obviously sexual abuse, financial and material abuse. But one of the more recent areas that was brought into that was obviously the areas of self-neglect, which I know is something that becomes quite a challenge in the safeguarding arena for all practitioners. But effectively, there's been a lot of developments recently in safeguarding about actually how do we make sure the person who is at risk is absolutely at the centre of the process. So a lot of the guidance, for example, that Sky has been involved in developing with the Local Government Association and ADAS has been about making safeguarding personal. So one of the key areas that I'm particularly passionate and interested in is obviously how you work with individuals who either may lack capacity to consent to any arrangements, or where an individual is saying that they don't obviously want to get involved in the safeguarding process, how you continue to support them. So yeah, effectively that sums it up for me really, is how do we identify adults at risk, particularly, and obviously for young people as well, and then effectively which statutory services are obviously then responsible for continuing that process once, you know, provision is sort of identified that that person is at risk as well.
Oh, go on, Adam.
No, I was going to say it's really interesting, and I think when we usually say safeguarding, people just think abuse, don't they? They think, oh, it's abuse, and that's what it must be. It's all about abuse and nothing more, which actually isn't true, is it, Claire?
No, not at all. It's absolutely about how to empower a person to potentially even just make a change in their life, to make themselves feel that they're safer in an environment. So it's not always about a situation happening, it's about actually empowering them to understand what they can do in their own situations. For me, which I'll sort of talk about later, there's very much a difference between the term safeguarding and safeguards, because actually there is a thing about empowering and giving people support, as well as obviously helping situations where they may need protection. So it isn't just about a situation that obviously arises, it's about how you empower people to recognize their strengths and ability to manage risks as well.
Thank you very. Oh, Adam, you get back with anything? No. Yeah. No. Yes. No. So I think one of the
I'm just going to
things for
apologise
me.
to that because my decorator disconnected my internet before, and I'm still on a sort of catch up. I don't know what's going on with my internet, so I think I'm on a slight delay. Just imagine I'm on the moon and I'm getting the messages about 5 seconds late. Sorry about that.
No, you're okay. We've had a couple of questions come in, and actually one of them relates to what I was going to ask you. So I think obviously every organisation kind of has their policies and procedures, and I think if we're all honest, they're all really lengthy, normally a number of pages, and our staff might read them in their induction, never read them again. They don't absorb that information. There's been a question here around what resources are available that we can give to our carers. Is there any links or anything that you can signpost people to that you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the first one, which I'm always going to mention, is our Sky website, our Social Care Institute for Excellence. So that includes a number of documents and resources which break down every area of safeguarding and what safeguarding is. What I would say is we do a lot of our resources that's provider facing, particularly for the social care sector, but there are, for example, videos and things like that, which will explain things a little bit better about particular areas of safeguarding that people want more information about. There are loads of organisations that are out there, such as Age UK, such as Autism, and the Learning Disability England, which are really good at, for example, making more accessible guides as well. So one of the areas I would say is if you have, if you're aware of, so for example, you're supporting somebody who is autistic, somebody who's got learning disabilities, or somebody with dementia, there are a lot of specialist services out there that work very closely with people who use services to try and develop more accessible guides. The experience I tend to have as well in my previous role is a lot of the local authorities have safeguarding adults boards, which was obviously another statutory requirement as part of the Care Act and safeguarding, and they are responsible for obviously generating responses to safeguarding in their area, but they do usually also have groups that work on very accessible guides. I know when I was in North Yorkshire, they looked at things like 1-minute guides. So if you think it's quite a minefield when you're having a look, absolutely look at your local authority safeguarding adults board website, because they more than likely will have a number of links and accessible links as well to resources around that. But Sky does also do training as well as videos, so if there is anybody who wants more information, we do have a website too.
Thank you very much. And yeah, I think that's a really good shout about the local safeguarding board. So I know the one here in Essex is really proactive, does a lot of free training and resources for staff just to join via webinars and bits and pieces, and also face-to-face. So yeah, that's really good. We've had another question about how do you support a person who is empowered but statutory authority will not listen to them?
Right, okay. So how do you support a person who's empowered but statutory? Right, okay. So is this effectively somebody who is voicing? So is somebody who does feel empowered to challenge their situation, but the local authority is not listening to them? I would always say advocacy is one area. So although this person might feel empowered or feeling particularly strong to kind of vocalize what support they need, sometimes it's about knowing who to speak to and where to access. And I find advocacy services are particularly good at knowing what kind of agencies to get involved if there is a particular situation that person wants to talk about. So I would absolutely put them in contact with a local advocacy organisation, get them to ask them advice, sort of talk to, am I speaking to the right people? Because sometimes it might be a case of, trying to find that one person within whatever organisation you're trying to contact to try and start those conversations. So I would say keep trying, but advocacy is absolutely one of the first port of call that I would advise in those situations.
And I suppose there's something around, and this isn't, I say it's no one's fault, it's probably someone's fault right now.
Yeah.
There needs to be more accountability for people who have, or who are looking and supporting after people who have no one and are using advocacy services. There's at the moment, there is a severe lack of accountability, and we do need to look into that, and we do need to change that moving forward. I want to ask, whose responsibility is safeguarding? So is it just staff? Is it managers? Who should be really thinking, actually, I've got a responsibility to safeguarding?
It's that very straightforward thing. Everybody has a responsibility for safeguarding. I think it's one of the things that we've been talking about a lot more in Sky is about the variety of organisations that don't necessarily understand their responsibility. So we're talking things from like universities and their safeguarding responsibilities for students. There are even sort of gym companies who are starting to think about how they support their more vulnerable customers. It is absolutely everybody's business. I think it's anybody who could potentially come across somebody who is at risk, or who needs empowering to kind of challenge a situation, or just needs support to go somewhere, to talk to somebody, to ask advice and be directed somewhere. There is always going to be some sort of responsibility around safeguarding, whether you are a signposter, whether you are a safe place. Everybody's got a different level of how they will support somebody through safeguarding, I think.
So just before we go into how do we tell these people that they've got a responsibility in safeguarding, and how's the best way to communicate it, we just had another comment come through based on the previous conversation. And I suppose this comes back down to my sort of mention around accountability. But what if you say your local authority, the person, your local LSAB, local safeguarding Alps board, whatever, don't fulfill, they don't really come through with your sort of question. Can we safeguard the safeguarders? What's our option then if we feel like nothing's being done?
I always, again, come back to advocacy, because there is usually a question about which statutory responsibility hasn't been fulfilled, or the person feels hasn't been fulfilled, because individuals will have a number of, say, legal rights, but unfortunately you can only really find out how far that legal right is being breached unless you seek legal advice. And sometimes it's just having a conversation with again, I would say advocate or another practitioner to say, okay, well, this has happened. Does this kind of sound like something that might be, for example, breaching my rights? It very much depends on what the actual individual issue is, I believe. And then you can start to kind of dig into, well, actually, where can they go to challenge that? Because there will be a different avenue for every particular situation, whether that be complaints, whether that be the ombudsman, whether that be going to the Court of Protection for sort of domestic family cases. It very much depends on how severe the situation is and how it can, and hopefully whether it can be resolved at an individual level. I think I would always encourage anybody to try and have a conversation with somebody else connected to the same organization, because sometimes, unfortunately, it can be the individual, but you would hope that they would be surrounded by a number of individuals that might be able to guide that person. So absolutely, just keep asking the questions and keep asking who you should be speaking to.
Thank you very much. And I know we've had a couple of people talking about this in the comments, and it was a question I had based on experience of my last service that I was managing, which is where there was such a lack of advocacy available within that particular area. What would your advice be, or is there any advocacy services that you know of that you can recommend for people that are in that situation, for the people they're supporting?
I think it's really difficult because obviously it's very local. It's always very based on local commissioning procedures. So it'll be whichever local authority is commissioned with whichever advocacy organisation. I'd probably start with some of the national organisations and asking advice. So, for example, you've got Learning Disability England for some, you've got Age UK. All of them generally have advice lines. So I would always advise anybody who doesn't know, if they're feeling like they're a bit stuck, they don't know who else to go to, and they don't know about what organisation is available to support them, is to try some of those national helplines to see whether they can kind of be pinpointed to the right organisation in that area. Because unfortunately, Google is a minefield. So whilst I know about probably 5 or 6 advocacy organisations off the top of my head, there are probably hundreds out there. The challenge is absolutely demand, and obviously whether the service is available in that particular area. So you may find in one area that, there's a really big service that's commissioned. And what I will say is there's lots of different types of advocacy. So it very much depends on what type of advocacy you need to access. And so I don't completely and utterly flood everybody with information. I absolutely recommend just having a look. But one of the things that I did write for North Yorkshire on their Mental Capacity Act pages is a list of the different types of advocacy and what they are, because sometimes it's about knowing what to ask for. Because there's some things that people have a right to under the law, like under the Mental Capacity Act and Mental Health Act. And then there are other things which are called general advocacy, which you generally have to ask a local authority for. So you need to empower yourself to know what it is that you want and what the situation is. And then hopefully you'll be able to kind of, first of all, ask your local authority about what's available, or second of all, try and access a national helpline to sort of see if they know about local services available in areas. So it's not a straightforward and easy answer, but effectively every local authority has a requirement to provide some sort of advocacy service. So
luckily enough, this is on catch up as well. So anyone who is, this is a lot to take in, and it's really, really good stuff. So do make sure you catch up, go back and watch it. It's all going to be there online. You'll be able to watch it for days on end. So one last question really around safeguarding before we start approaching the LPS part of the conversation. We could come back to safeguarding later on, but I know there's a ton of people who are going, oh, LPS, I want to know more. But how do we communicate best to the people that we're supporting, the people that they're related to, our teams, about what their roles in safeguarding are? So what are the ways, because we all want to be compliant, and we all want CQC to come around and go, oh, look how safe they are, because everyone knows what they're supposed to do with safeguarding. So tips for managers, what are the best ways to really let people know this?
Finding the most easy and accessible information about it and supplying it to whoever you're talking to, because sometimes having a conversation doesn't help that person understand. They sometimes need to go away and really digest that information to then relate it to their area of work. So what I experience a lot in my job, say with the Mental Capacity Act, is if I go to somebody and say Mental Capacity Act, a lot of people are going to go, oh God, that's, really legal framework. However, if I said to somebody it is about making decisions, then it starts to make people click a bit more. So I think it's about find what information you think is good, reliable, really easy to understand, get it saved somewhere as a resource, and supply that resource when you're having conversations with people and you think they need to know, or you think they have a responsibility in a situation around safeguarding, and just advise them to just have a look at it and then invite them to have a conversation about it. I think it is just making people click about what it looks like in their particular setting.
Thank you very much. So on to the meaty subject that I know a lot of people have joined to listen and learn more about, LPS. So what is LPS?
So Liberty Protection Safeguards, which is what LPS is short for, or LIPS keeps getting bandied about as well, but I prefer LPS if I'm being personally honest, is basically a new legal framework to authorise the restrictions or detentions of people who can't consent to their arrangements. So some of you on this call may have come across something called deprivation of liberty safeguards. This basically process, which some people may have experienced, has always been found to be very burdensome, paperwork heavy, that kind of thing. So as soon as, for example, somebody enters a care home and doesn't have the mental capacity to consent to entering that care home, and their arrangements amount to continuous supervision and control, they start to meet this criteria for deprivation of liberty. And basically, everybody's been shouting for a very long time to say that when that happens, it takes a very long time to go through that process and authorize that person's deprivation of liberty. And we need to make this easier. But I'm going to come back to the basics, really, about why liberty protection safeguards, to kind of give you an understanding of why it's going to the place that it's going. So it's very much about the Human Rights Act. It's very much about how do we ensure that people's liberty is protected. Now, liberty can mean very different things to different people. But effectively, it's as soon as you start to interfere with somebody's movement or start to think about restricting their movement, you're starting to think about, are you impacting on their liberty? Now, there was, it was about 2014, there was a few cases that went to something called the Supreme Court, which is obviously the highest decision-making power when it comes to the family law sector. And they heard 4 cases that basically went from thinking about a person with a physical disability and was unable to consent to being there, who was just they were just in a home with their foster mother, going to college, that kind of thing, to a case where somebody had a full bodysuit on, needed complete restriction because they were sort of taking out their pads and trying to eat them and that kind of thing. And the question before that Supreme Court was, are these people deprived of their liberty? And the question basically was, these individuals, all 4 of these individuals, can't make the decision to reside in this, whether it be a care home or their own home. They can't make a decision about the care that they receive. And ultimately, they won't be able to just move out without support. So we want to ask you, Supreme Court, are these people deprived of their liberty? And effectively, what was found out was, yes, they were. And the wording that came out from it was, a gilded cage is still a cage, which might sound really dramatic, but it's something to kind of put visually in your heads. What they were basically saying was, there's something called relative normality. So there was an argument that all of these disabled people required these arrangements because they were disabled and they needed additional support. But what Lady Hale said, who was President of the Supreme Court at the time, was that effectively, whether it be a restriction to my liberty to be restricted to a certain place, to not be able to freely leave, shouldn't be different for me or somebody with a disability. We should all have the opportunity to choose where we live, to choose the care that we receive, and to not be restricted without due process. So then we got this deprivation of liberty safeguards in the format that it's in. So it did exist before that, but it became a lot easier to determine that people were deprived of their liberty. So the floodgates opened, as a lot of local authorities will say, and effectively the majority of people that were in care homes or nursing homes that couldn't consent to being there met this criteria. But some of you may have experienced, it's a very long assessment process. It effectively takes a couple of practitioners to go in and do some really in-depth assessments about whether somebody should be there, getting the care that they need, whether it's in their best interests, whether the restrictions are too restrictive, and effectively determining whether there is some diagnosis that affects their decision-making. And it can take a very long time to authorise that. What I will say is, deprivation of liberty isn't necessarily a negative thing that must be avoided. It should be, and that's the kind of ethos that we should always be doing. We should always be avoiding a deprivation of liberty, but sometimes it's completely unavoidable. So what liberty protection safeguards was trying to do was those situations where it is absolutely something we cannot change. This person needs 24-hour care. They're in a nursing care situation, can't consent to it, etc. Is we need a process that's a lot more friendlier to the individuals that are in the centre of that process, in terms of they're not over-processed in order to authorise these arrangements. It's to give them extra protections. And this is where I come into the word of safeguards rather than safeguarding. So the key in liberty protection safeguards and deprivation of liberty safeguards is safeguards. And what safeguards mean are protections that people are given as a result of being given an authorization. So if somebody is deprived of their liberty, if they need deprivation of liberty safeguards now, when that's authorised, they're given access to an advocate. So that's one area, that's a legal right to advocacy, whether that be a family member or a friend or a paid advocate. They get given a certain amount of time in which somebody needs to go in and review those arrangements, and they get given a speedy access to the Court of Protection should they need to challenge those arrangements, which is something I'll go into in a little bit more detail. But effectively, it just makes sure that if somebody is restricted, they can very easily challenge it. Without those safeguards, it becomes a bit more difficult and a bit more lengthy to challenge those arrangements. So liberty protection safeguards was the result of effectively the Law Commission going in and basically saying we need to completely overhaul this process and we need to make this easier. And what they wanted to do was to make sure that no matter where a person was, whether that be in their own home or a care home, they could access these safeguards, because there's a slightly different process for both at the moment. And also that it didn't matter whether they were younger. So at the moment, the Mental Capacity Act applies at 16. They want people who are deprived of their liberty at 16 to also have access to safeguards, which kind of makes sense for me. But they also wanted to make sure that it became part of the everyday assessment processes under, say, the Care Act or healthcare assessment processes in hospitals. So instead of, for example, a social worker going out and doing their Care Act assessment, putting the support in place, then referring it to a best interest assessor to do an assessment, they want it to be all part of the same process, which makes sense. What they don't want to do is sort of have 2 or 3 different people in to effectively do the same thing, which is, you need these arrangements, let's authorize them. The challenge is that what they will be doing is making hospitals responsible for their own arrangements. So if people go into hospital at the moment, that has to go to the local authority to authorize. They want to give the powers back to hospitals to be able to authorize their own. They will also effectively change the advocacy role. So it sort of makes it better in a way. Instead of getting an advocate at the end of the process, they want it to be there at the beginning of the process. So that's better for people. But they want to be able to authorize arrangements for longer. So one of the things that's a bit contentious is, with deprivation of liberty at the moment, you can have an authorization in place for 12 months, up to 12 months. So there can be people with authorizations in for like 3 or 6 months. They want to be able to extend that for up to 3 years for individuals where there will be no changes. So we are talking about people in very settled care home situations where their diagnosis is not going to change, their condition is not going to change within the process of 3 years, which some family members really did campaign for, because one of the things that they do keep saying about deprivation of liberty safeguards now is the annual reassessment process that kind of follows. So they just want it to be part of everyday practice. So for me, I think the biggest changes that family members are probably going to experience is that they are asking there to be a general awareness for family members, particularly, about what a deprivation of liberty looks like. And they want that kind of training to be available. So that's quite a new area. They will make it easier for people in their own homes to be assessed for deprivation of liberty. So that can be quite an uncomfortable area as well. I think it will be a challenge for parents of 16 to 18-year-olds with disabilities that might fall into this criteria about the idea of deprivation of liberty in their own home. And that's something that we need to really think about and explore. It actually changes things for care homes and nursing homes a bit, in that there won't be quite the same requirement to say that you have to refer. There will still be a requirement you identify somebody's deprived of their liberty, send a referral in. But it's more about the local authority making sure they're aware of people. So I think we'll find a heavier balance onto the local authorities again, and the hospitals in this scenario. And one of the things that probably has both a help and a hindrance is they want this authorization to be portable. So they want people who have gone from hospital into a care home for it to be able to be moved from the hospital to the care home, or care home to hospital, vice versa, which for me can make sense where somebody just needs to pop in for a few days for some treatment, then needs to go back. But for me, it also is a little bit nerve-wracking when it's somebody who's going into, from a hospital, for example, into a care home for the first time. You would hope that they wouldn't rely on that information, because people's conditions can change quite dramatically from discharge from hospital. So it's a little bit of an area that people have sort of raised concerns in, but they are trying to think about how they make the process less paperwork heavy, less burdensome, and very much part of everyday assessment processes. But I think before I kind of stop and have a look at questions, I think my final messages would be is the notion of liberty protection safeguards is not new. The process essentially is, but liberty protection safeguards aren't. It's very much about how do you get practitioners, family members, social care staff to understand that the decisions that they make or the actions that they undertake might amount to a deprivation of liberty. It's stuff we should already be doing. It's just kind of making it part of your everyday practice that's the slight change. So I think there's a lot for me about, regardless of whether there's, delays, no delays, implementation, there's a lot within that we need to already be doing before we're even thinking about what the new process of liberty protection safeguards might look like. So who knows when or if it will appear? We will soon find out, I'm sure. But for me, yeah, it will be about, can we do this as part of our everyday practice? And that's the key question for me.
I'm going to come, that's honestly really helpful. Probably the most concise explanation I've had of it since it's been mentioned. I just want to be a little bit contentious now and go, is it going to happen? Because I remember 2014, I remember 2015 as a registered manager, and they were like, you've got to recommend everybody. And I was like, oh, right, okay. It took us 5 years until we had our first assessment done.
Yeah.
We had no deprivation of liberties approved for 5 years. It was bonkers, and there was no staff there to do it. The local authorities didn't have the staff to do it. We've not got the funds to currently run social care as it currently stands. And I know what you're saying is now it's going to make things a little easier. I still hear a lot more work. I still hear more work, which means more staff, which means more money. Is this possible, Claire?
I think it's about looking at what it's trying to do rather than looking at what it's going to look like in practice and trying to get that ethos. Because I think there's an argument for me about actually the principles of what liberty protection safeguards are unchanged, which is better mental capacity practice. And I think, yeah, absolutely. If we're challenging things here, I think, we are talking 17 years down the line from its first mention or inception. Obviously, it was a few years before it was implemented, about the Mental Capacity Act. And we're still in a situation where we're talking about people who are really struggling to understand what that looks like in practice. So I think liberty protection safeguards is probably going to be another one of those. It's going to take a very long time for anybody to feel relatively comfortable with where that is. But I think for me is, yes, everything that means change is going to mean change of resources, kind of implications, that kind of thing. There's absolutely no denying that there's going to be an impact because, you've got to rewrite training materials, you've got to create resources for people. There is nothing that's going to be less resource intensive in that, but it's about having a think about the sort of things that we need to know to make that less difficult in terms of, for example, getting everybody to understand what a deprivation of liberty is. Because actually, the bit with liberty protection safeguards is just a new piece of paper. It's a new piece of paperwork that needs to be implemented. But actually, the ethos and the practice elements are already there today. So can we do that now?
Thank you. One more contentious question from myself.
Yeah.
I'm in the mood today. I'm in the mood for a lot of contention. Who's going to be telling CQC about this? Are they involved in this? Are they going to be fully aware of this? Because, again, my experience with CQC inspectors is they would come around and go, you've not safeguarded this. This is a safeguarding. And then my local safeguarding team were like, this isn't a safeguarding. What are they talking about? And they didn't even understand safeguarding then. So how confident are we that the Care Quality Commission, with their new framework, which, again, is still yet to hit like most things, is going to be able to fully understand this, and what faith have we got for providers in that the regulator understanding this?
Well, essentially the regulator, there are some data requirements within liberty protection safeguards which make more sense to use care home support, really, that there will be some requirements to report back on people that are deprived of their liberty effectively. So CQC have to build that into what they're looking for as part of their inspection processes. My question is, my contentious bit is, do Ofsted and CQC, are they going to be talking to each other? Because you're going to have 16-year-olds that are going to meet that criteria and then move through, obviously, to adult services and into CQC. So is that bit going to match up? That's the bit that I would like to sort of find out a bit more about. What I would say is, LPS, liberty protection safeguards, impacts on a lot of different things. I've got questions around Mental Health Act reform. I've got questions around CQC assurance, because anything that regulates how services provide support to an individual need to consider how those arrangements amount to restrictive practices. So any organisation that looks at that, whether that be CQC, Ofsted, that kind of thing, needs to have an awareness of what liberty protection safeguards is, because that's the general ethos. And also it's within the Mental Capacity Act. So it's not, it's nothing new. So they're going to have to, if they're legal requirements are to look at people's legal implementation of the Mental Capacity Act, liberty protection safeguards is attached to that. So absolutely. What it will look like as part of that framework, we have yet to see, but it absolutely has to be part and parcel of it.
Thank you very much. And I think I echo Adam's concerns around the delays, and I remember submitting them every year. So actually, if you're going to have to do it one for every 3 years, I do kind of have some concerns that capacity might change in bits and pieces, and we're going to have to make sure that actually we're on the ball of making sure that actually we're then notifying people if that does change. CQC wise, a large majority of my background is learning disability and mental health, and I remember the last care home I managed, the CQC really did not understand, or the inspector did not understand doles at all, and could not understand why the majority of the residents didn't have doles and were going out on their own. And it took me a long time to sit down and explain that actually they had capacity, they'd had a lot of training and input and support to actually get to where they were. But yeah, so I definitely think there's a lot of upskilling when it comes to definitely learning disability, autism, and the CQC. We've had a couple of questions coming in. One from Tina around the paperwork. Is the plan still for no national templates?
That was the last I heard as well, and I haven't heard any other update in relation to that. We have to remember, even with the templates that are in now for deprivation of liberty safeguards, they're not statutory, and neither will liberty protection safeguards be. So those poor individuals that are in between different local authorities, and care homes will know this, if they work between different local authorities, the form can look very different, even if it's asking similar questions. It's probably going to be the same with liberty protection safeguards. But it is something that I believe has been echoed nationally in the consultation about the concerns about how variable implementation might be, but also how process might work. So we need the codes of practice, which are also going to be updated, just to mention. So there's 2 books at the moment for the Mental Capacity Act and deprivation of liberty to give practitioners guidance on how they should apply this in practice. They're going to merge them and make one big book. That needs updating. So it needs to give enough guidance for people about what consistent practice will look like across the board, so that we can hopefully encourage similarities, really. But yeah, the forms aren't going to be statutory.
No, thank you very much. And Tina has also asked about when will registered managers training being released, so that we know it's been approved.
When's that? Sorry, just repeat that again. Sorry.
When will registered managers training be released so that they know it's been approved? I think there's a worry a bit like when Oliver McGowan training was released, that a lot of providers were approached by training companies that were offering this training for large sums of money, and then obviously NHS training came along and actually it's a free resource and providers are already out of pocket. So yeah.
Until you hear anything from central government about implementation, then you can't sort of accept that there's going to be any training that's specific to LPS until the regulations and codes of practice are formally released, really. So what I would say is you always wait for that national message that says, right, this is the date it's going to be implemented. Then following that, there is normally a training implementation plan that comes with it. So there is normally some indication as to which responsibilities, who needs to be trained first. So there's a lot of roles within liberty protection safeguards that need to be trained up as well, like the new advocacy role. There's something called an approved mental capacity professional, which replaces best interest assessor. So they will have to lay that out in terms of that implementation plan. So usually they kind of release and say, right, okay, well, we might be ready to transition it on this date, but actually we want to make sure everybody's trained before full implementation, which has happened before. Where they've said, right, okay, we'll make it live, but we won't actually implement the full thing until this date, until we've given enough time for the sector to be trained. So we don't know when, obviously, at this stage, and we don't, but effectively it will follow the national announcements as to when all the training needs to be rolled out. The other thing I will say in terms of the last understanding and the consultation and the codes of practice is that responsibility for training usually falls to the relevant local authority around this. So I would always go to them first. If you ever want to ask questions about, is this legitimate training, you would go to your local authority, because they've got contracting teams that will tell you about where they need to access their training from, because there will be legal requirements. So always go back to your local authority and question if you see anything.
This is all incredibly interesting. I think really helpful to everyone who is listening. Just before I go to the next question, can I just clarify for people who are watching this who might not be managers and au fait with the current process, what do we mean by templates? With us having no national templates, what do we mean by template? Just so that they're aware.
Yeah. So at the moment, where a care home or even where it's a supported living provider, if somebody recognises that an individual they're supporting might be deprived of their liberty because they can't consent to their arrangements, they're subject to something called continuous supervision and control. So it basically means checked on throughout the day, possibly the night as well, and not free to leave. So they're not free to just choose where they want to live. Then they need to complete a form. So it's normally that provider, that organisation that's responsible for the care that needs to complete that form. The complication gets, if it's a care home, a hospital or a nursing home, they complete this referral form, and it's called a form 1 or 2, dependent on whether it's a renewal or a new one. And they send that to a local authority, which basically says, this person is deprived of their liberty. Please, can you come out and assess to authorise it? If a person's in their own home, so whether that be in extra care, whether that be in a supported living or in a family environment with care provided, it can only be authorised by the Court of Protection. So the only way that that can be authorised is a social worker, social care worker needs to get involved and do some assessments and send some forms off to the Court of Protection via their legal team to get it authorised. So it's slightly more complex. What I would say, to make anybody feel that that's a bit worrying and concerning, that it's normally read on paper. So when I say it goes to the Court of Protection, if it's standard and there's no problems with that particular situation, it just needs to be authorised. A judge will usually just read the paper, stamp it and say it's authorised. Again, not a quick process, but it doesn't mean you have to sit in front of the court in most cases and explain. It's normally all on paper. But the easiest way is usually, where somebody is in a care home, hospital or nursing home, that particular organisation will send a form to a local authority to get somebody out to have a look at it. And those are the forms, and when they're talking about statutory forms.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Again, a fantastic explanation. We've had a comment come through, and it's around do care workers need to do more paperwork? If we're going to go in more tech, do we need more red tape and hoops to jump through? So this is from the perspective of someone living in care. So there's a concern that, I'm living in care and actually they're doing loads of paperwork already. Is it going to affect my care moving forward negatively?
Yeah, well, we hope that it will streamline things. So effectively, it will be fewer forms to fill out for the same thing. Now, when it says about more tech, so if you're thinking about more tech to implement processes or more tech to support a person, because there's slightly two different angles with that. When I'm thinking tech, for example, telecare or some sort of tele support for an individual, does that become restrictive and do I need to get arrangements? So there's been lots of conversations about CCTV. There's been lots of conversations about door sensors and that kind of thing. Do they become restrictive and deprivation of liberty? And I always advise just speak to your local authority, ask their guidance, say, does this need a form? Do we need to send it through? Liberty protection safeguards shouldn't necessarily change the requirement to ask those questions, but you would hope that it kind of be done as part and parcel of that person's move to that environment. From a tech perspective, in terms of environments thinking, right, well, I'm setting up situations to do all this paperwork more electronically, then hopefully local authorities will probably work on similar systems to what they're doing now. So if you're already working with local authorities or health authorities on their processes, you're more likely it's going to be part and parcel of whatever they're doing. So hopefully it will it won't hopefully create a new technological requirement in order to do that process. So hopefully that answered it either way.
Yeah, no, that was really, really good. Thank you, Claire. Thank you. Right. So what can we do to upskill our teams now? What can we be looking at? How, and I hate to say this, what urgency is there to upskill our teams? I mean, we need to be upskilling our teams anyway, so they understand this and it'll be great. Yeah. Should we be telling them about it now? Is it going to confuse them when they're learning about dolls because they need to know about dolls? Will it confuse them to know about LPS at the same time? What level of seniority should we be upskilling at this moment in time?
My biggest advice here is forget about LPS implementation. That does absolutely create some concerns in terms of I've got something else I need to consider. But actually, it's asking the question about how are we aware that of people who can't make decisions about their care and accommodation now? And are we aware that they're already deprived of their liberty? Because if the answer to that is yes, you should already be authorising them now. It just looks different with liberty protection safeguards. So there'll be an additional requirement to think about, or the paperwork might change slightly. the urgency for me is this is about Mental Capacity Act compliance now. So this is about our understanding of supporting people who can't make decisions about their care and accommodation, and we should already be doing it. There is already a legal requirement to do that. So the urgency for me is about, if you think I'm not going to be able to implement liberty protection safeguards because I don't understand it, then that's your biggest question mark about, actually it's because we don't understand deprivation of liberty. Because once you get to know deprivation of liberty and what to do about it, you're already pretty much 80% of the way there. It's just going to be a different piece of paper to fill in. So the urgency for me is we should already be doing it. So I would say, absolutely, Sky, obviously we have a number of resources to help upskill people. There are a number of resources out there that are also really, really good for family members. I'd absolutely recommend Age UK in terms of understanding some of the implications with mental capacity. But actually, you just need to start having conversations with whether that be the people that are caring for your individual about how you are following the Mental Capacity Act, that kind of thing, to try and obviously keep yourself feeling reassured that they're following that. But just reading, just getting to know it, getting to understand what people should be doing around the Mental Capacity Act can help empower individuals, family members, and obviously professionals to know that they're already doing the right thing before liberty protection safeguards comes. And I think that's the key for me. So I'm a bit contentious in that, just, we don't know when it's coming yet. And we don't know if and when and what it will look like, but actually it's not new. It's just not new process. So we just need to get a better understanding of what it should be now.
I think that'll be really, really reassuring for providers, because I think it is still a really grey area. And I've just shared a link in the comments for Sky's MCA and Dole's at a glance document, because I think I remember using that and it was really informative. So yeah, I think actually the advice that you've just given of actually get your head around Dole's, and actually the rest will kind of.
And we have an LPS video as well. So if anybody after this wants to get to know a bit more about it, then it's got a lot more of the kind of human rights philosophy behind it that sort of gives you a little bit more about why are we doing LPS. But yeah, there's a video there as well. It's very good and self-explanatory.
I was just looking for the video, but I will share it into the comments. Tina's just come in with a comment saying, I still deliver MCA training and totally agree. So many people still lack understanding the implementation and the consequences of actions. Thank you for the session. And Nicola is also, and I do 100% agree, 39 Essex Street is another good website. And you can also follow them on LinkedIn and Twitter, which I do, but often share some really good, interesting bits and pieces. Adam, any last questions?
Well, I've probably got about 1 million, but we're at time, which is just absolutely crazy. I think, Claire, you've given us a really great insight into LPS. I know it is just scratching the surface, and we say this every week, we're only just scratching the surface. It'd be great to follow up with you in the future and see how things are going, to get some more knowledge from you. Maybe we can sort of nail down some of the hot topics from tonight's conversation moving forward. Maybe there's a WhatsApp group going on within Parliament at the moment, and they're all mocking us about LPS. How do we scare them? How do we get more people to do the training? We never know. Honestly, it's really riled me. It completely has. But I think it's been absolutely fab. I would just parting words of wisdom from yourself and managers who are sitting, listening to this and going, this has been really informative, but oh my God, I feel like I've had a 3-course dinner in 5 minutes. What sort of words of wisdom can you give to our listeners before we depart?
I think it's about, if you're working with people and people at the center of everything that you do, then actually you don't have huge amounts to worry about other than getting to know some of the technical requirements associated with change. I think if you're making sure that you are listening to people, you are speaking to family members, you are speaking to your local authorities, etc., as much as you possibly can, then you're doing everything that you can and just trying to keep yourself informed in between. So every part of all this change is supposed to be making sure that, we support people in different ways, communication challenges are there, etc. So just make sure people continue to be at the center of everything that we do.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Claire. Mark, any last words before we close out?
No, nothing else from me. No further questions, but just want to say thank you very much again, Claire. I think I've written down so many notes, and I think actually it's really helped clear kind of that brain fog and grey area that I had. So thank you very much.
think that's brilliant. And if and when there is an announcement, if you want to talk about what it means, then obviously by all means, I'm happy to follow up.
So we'll see you in about 5 years' time then, maybe. Yeah. God, I'm really pessimistic. I'm joking. Hopefully by the end of this. In fact, I was reading an article earlier on today, and it's like 7 months until LPS, and this was like last November. And I was like, oh not going to happen. Honestly, thank you so much for joining us. This is The Caring View. Visit us at www.thecaringview.co.uk. We have free resources going out every single Friday. We've got a plethora of resources now available, free to download from our website. You can also listen to our podcast directly from our website. We are in Series 3 at the moment, and we're interviewing people who are making a success out of their startups. They're exciting entrepreneurs and influencing inventors and innovators. So it's absolutely fab. We've just done a release with Ian Clegg that went out yesterday. We've got Sophie Coulthard's podcast going out next week. And then the week after, we've got Debbie Harris from Autumna. So go and listen. You can find that on our website, and all of our episodes are on our website as well. So until then, thank you so much. And we will see you next week. Good night. God bless.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Oh, I'm dashing to find our outro.